Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for another ABLOY Academy virtual instructor-led training. My name is Chad Tibbets. I'm a training specialist with ABLOY Academy. So glad to have you here this morning. Today's topic is choosing the correct tools and methods for installing commercial hardware. This is going to be kind of a nerdy tech discussion. But that's okay. I love it. It's something that I'm passionate about. I want to just say that a few things before we get started. Firstly, we have 2 to 3 weeks of these planned virtual instructor-led trainings up on our website that you can register for. And we're always adding new topics to the discussion. If you ever miss one where you're trying to log on and maybe something happens or you get called away, we do record these. This is being recorded and it will be available for you to watch again within 24 hours after this training is finished. Also, while you're on our site registering for our VILT sessions, go ahead and sign up for our online academy where you have access to over 50 online courses that range anywhere from basic door handing to how exit devices work, to door closers, to even more advanced topics such as fire door codes. So check that out. Also, your way of communicating to me during this session is the Q&A, and I'll be monitoring the Q&A, the question and answer tab on my end, and answering those as we go. So I'd love to hear your feedback. Even if that's, hey, you don't know what you're talking about, those are always great information as well. And so let's get started. We're going to talk today about things that I have learned through being a door and hardware installer for many years, as well as what I've learned from installers that I've trained. As an instructor, I've never claimed to know everything, and I will never know everything. And I love meeting people all over the nation and in Canada and learning all of other people's tips and tricks. So this session is kind of a culmination of all of those things that I have learned, and then I've also learned from you guys. So here we go. As always with installation, safety first, right? We need to make sure that we're wearing our proper personal protection equipment, gloves, safety glasses, different types of gloves for different applications, but just make sure that you're protecting your eyes and your fingers and your body. Some of these parts we only have one set of, so we definitely need to take care of ourselves. So throughout this video or this presentation, you'll see some video of me using tools. I typically don't like using gloves when I'm measuring, but I will be using gloves and a face shield if I'm doing any type of drilling or cutting and so on. So just as proof, putting on my gloves, I will be putting on my face shield. So talking about PPE equipment, these are just a few of my favorites. There are many different kinds out there, and some, not saying that any are better than others, but if I'm using a drill, if I'm using a grinder, a rotary Dremel tool or something like that, I prefer a full face shield. I have actually been to the optometrist getting metal taken out of my eye when I was wearing safety glasses. So there, if you're cutting, metal can bounce right around those safety glasses and get stuck in your eye. So I prefer a face shield. If I'm using something that's really noisy, like a grinder, earplugs are a must, but earplugs tend to get dirty really quickly, especially if you have grimy grease or whatever on your fingers. So I prefer these ear muffs that you see there on the left-hand side of your screen. They're great because they wrap around the back of your neck and they don't get in the way of your face shield, which is pretty awesome. For gloves, I really like TIG welding gloves, and yeah, they're kind of purpose-built for TIG welding, but they're a fairly lightweight leather. They have a lot of dexterity built into the glove, and they cover my wrist. I just really like them. You can get a pair from Harbor Freight for like $13. So I have several pairs of those. I really like them a lot. Our purpose, process, payoff statement for today, I'll share some tips and tricks, hopefully to help improve the safety, accuracy, and efficiency of commercial hardware installation. But you know what? You can apply these things that I'm telling you to even your weekend hobby projects that you're working on. Ultimately, we're trying to ensure that the products function as intended and last as long as possible. And I'll say this honestly, I have looked at many doors and frames with hardware that have failed. And oftentimes, the reason why the hardware failed is because it wasn't installed right, and it ended up coming loose on a door or was in a bind. And it goes that way for a long time. A lock usually is not reported to be loose until it's hanging off the door or it's landing on, it's on the floor. And at that point, it may be too late to save the hardware. And commercial hardware is not inexpensive. It's not cheap. It's designed to last a long time. And so there's a few things that we can do with installation that allow us to use that hardware for as long as it's intended to be used. So our topics for today, we'll talk a little bit about marking and measuring when we're drilling a hole in a door or a frame. You know, sometimes we get one shot at it, and that's a little scary and daunting. But if we're working on a FEMA rated, a windstorm rated assembly, we're really only allowed to put one hole in it if that particular hardware is mounted through one hole. We make a mistake measuring or marking and we have to put two holes in it. Well, technically the code says that that's not a certified opening any longer. So we've got to be careful. We'll talk some about tools that I love and how to use them. We'll talk about our supplied templates that we give you in our boxes and how we can sometimes modify those templates to make them easier to use, as well as we'll talk briefly about process of an exit device install, as well as some tips and tricks I've learned in installing continuous hinges. And then finally, we'll talk about how ASSA ABLOY has developed some digital tools that can help you, the installer, the project manager, the distributor, the integrator, do your job better. So without further ado, we're going to talk first about one of my favorite topics, which is painter's tape, which is really kind of funny because I'm not a painter and actually can't stand painting. But painter's tape works really great for marking up a door or a frame and allowing you to put those measurement marks on that tape. It protects the door from those unnecessary scratches. If we've got a really nice finished door, the last thing we want to do is scratch it up right before we install hardware. The tape can be easily moved. If we realize that we are measuring on the wrong side of our tape measure, we can easily put another piece of tape on or just take that off, replace it, and measure again. My favorite just happens to be the yellow. I think it shows up marks really well, but anything will work. Even just a regular masking tape would work. They just tend to be a little bit stickier, and you need to make sure that you take them off the door before they permanently leave adhesive. So anytime I'm about to do a job for ASSA ABLOY or for anybody else, always come prepared with a couple rolls of painter's tape. A few other things that you absolutely have to have in your toolbox or in your toolkit are, of course, a tape measure, a combination square, sharp pencil is a must, or at least a really fine-tipped marker. And one of my favorite tools is a set of calipers, often used by machinists or engineers. Will show how you can use calipers in just everyday install to make things go quicker and easier. So the next little video I'm going to show is how we use a combination square to transfer lines across the top of a door. So let's say that we're installing a surface vertical rod exit device, and that surface vertical rod, the top rod, has through bolts. In this hypothetical installation, it has through bolts, and we want to make sure that that top rod latch assembly lines perfectly up with the chassis head of that exit device. And so there's some things that we just need to make sure. We've got to measure really well. So what I'll do is measure my backset, or my vertical center line. Backset and vertical center line for insulation are essentially the same thing. And I'll mark that to the top of the door at the center. Then I'll use my combination square to transfer that measurement down the front and the back face of the door. Because if we're mounting that top latch assembly for that exit device with through bolts, that means we've got holes that go all the way through the door. Well, we need to make sure that we drill all the way through the door accurately. And I've never been very good about just drilling through the door and it being perfectly on the other side. And I don't know very many people that are. So I always drill halfway through the door on one side, halfway through the door on the other, to ensure I have an accurate install. So I've made a mark at the top of this little mock-up door, and I'll draw a line straight across the top of the door. Taking that combination square, I'll transfer that line down both faces, to the front and to the back. This will be a reference line that will stay on the door the whole time that I'm doing an install. All my templating, all my measurements will be based off of this line. Now, if the door is beveled, that means that technically that measurement from the high side and the low side of the bevel is going to be different, but it doesn't really matter, because I'm going to line up my caliper, or not my caliper, but my combination square to that line, and then draw that line down the rest of the door. Of course, I'm going slow for the camera, and I'm actually looking through the camera doing this, but in a real life situation, this goes pretty quickly. Off of that vertical line, then we can reference and measure from the top of the door down or from the finished floor up to find our horizontal lines. Now, as I mentioned, I'm a big fan of using calipers, and some of you on this training may have never even seen calipers before, but they're very, very multifaceted. They work for several different things. As you see here, we can do an external measurement just to see how thick something is. Well, this may be necessary if we lost instructions and we're trying to see what size the screw is, and we need to drill and tap a hole in a door for a particular installation screw. Well, we can use these calipers to measure that screw diameter very accurately so that we can get the right drill bit. You can look at internal measurements, depth measurements. If we're installing a strike plate down into the floor, let's say again we're dealing with a FEMA rated or windstorm rated 3-point locking assembly, you have to have a certain depth measurement for the bottom latch bolt. Bottom latch bolt actually protrudes down into the floor, and it has to protrude a certain dimension so that that whole assembly is certified. Not only does the bolt have to protrude a certain distance into the floor, but the two anchors that hold the strike plate into position also have to be down a certain depth. Now, I guess you could take a pencil or something like that and just stick it down into the hole and hold it and then measure it with a tape measure. But using the depth measurement for the calipers is just, to me, faster and more accurate. But one of my favorite ways to use a caliper is the step measurement. And that's where we can actually take a particular measurement, let's say 5/8 of an inch. We can lock that into the calipers themselves. And let's say that we're installing a door closer. We have the bracket that installs on top of the frame. We can put those calipers right up against the bottom of the frame and then draw a line across the top. That'll give us an accurate 5/8 inch measurement for that bracket. And I didn't have to get up there at eye level with a tape measure and measure it. I know I could do this also with the door closed. So it just very easily. use these. They used to be expensive. They're not expensive anymore. An 8-inch set, a quality 8-inch digital set that will work in fractions of an inch, thousandths of an inch, and in metric is about $20 online. So very economical, good to have in your tool bag. So transitioning over to, let's talk about drill bits. Let's talk about cutting tools. Cutting tools are so important to our industry for proper installation. Drill bits are not all the same. They're not measured equally. It's hard to find quality drill bits from big box stores. So I recommend getting drill bits from a machinist supply or from an industrial supply that deals with cutting tools. The bits just last longer. But just to talk briefly about this, black oxide is the bit there in the center. That is a general all-purpose bit. It's good for cutting aluminum, softer metals like aluminum, brass. It's good for cutting mild steel. They're very inexpensive. They do lack durability, but they can be resharpened, so that's a plus. And then going up in the quality level a little bit is a high-speed steel. That's the larger, bright one there. The diameter doesn't matter, but the color does. That's a high-speed steel. A little bit more durable, in my opinion, than black oxide. And then finally, we have their cobalt. Cobalt is the metal that the bit is actually made out of, and they're very, very durable. They're very hard, and that's what you would have in your tool bag if you were cutting stainless. So if you're doing a corrosive resistant door, or you're cutting stainless steel push plates or kick plates or something like that, cobalt is definitely something that you should have. I know a lot of technicians that really hate putting holes in stainless steel, and it's more than likely because they're drilling too fast. The RPM is too fast and they're not using a cobalt bit. So definitely have to have different drill bits for different applications in your bag, and always use a good cutting fluid. Now, most cutting fluids are either petroleum based or they're synthetic oil, but you can also get cutting fluid that is water based. If you're trying to be environmentally friendly and you don't want to use a heavy, thick oil, I have a really good water-based cutting fluid that works phenomenally well on all materials, and you can easily just wipe the door off with a moist paper towel or something like that. So there's definitely options that are better for the environment. Carbide tipped drill bits are perfect for relieving a hole in a grout-filled frame, or if you have a mineral core door that you have to install hardware on, that as well is going to eat up a drill bit. So it doesn't matter if you've got a high speed, a black oxide, or a cobalt bit. If you're going through concrete, essentially concrete, then that bit's not going to last very long. So I started using these carbide tipped drill bits from Strong Arm Drills, and I just mentioned the company because I really like their bits. They make them all the way down to an 1/8 inch diameter. I think they go all the way up to 3/8 inch of diameter, and they make them in various different lengths. But if you're installing continuous hinges, or you're installing parallel mounted door closers on grout-filled frames, you have to have some carbide tipped drill bits. What you'll do is you'll take a smaller bit than you need, say an 1/8 inch bit, and you'll drill through the steel. You'll drill through the sheet metal. And then right behind that is going to be that grout, that essentially cement that's back behind there. You can use these carbide bits to clean that hole out, and then go up to your regular size that you're going to be drilling. And if you have to drill and tap, you can do that as well. But these are definitely necessary. If you're only going to carry a couple of sizes, then I would probably carry the 1/8 inch and the 3/16 inch that they sell. They're not super expensive. They last a long time. They're also great for drilling stainless steel as well. When it comes to drill bit length, it's kind of, it's just a preference thing. Almost always when you buy a bit, they're going to be jobber length. And you see those two bits are the same diameter. The top one is an all-purpose bit. It's a black gold bit. It is a black oxide with a titanium nitride coating. Just means it's more durable than a regular black oxide bit. And the bottom bit is a cobalt bit that's a stubby. And stubbies are fantastic for hardware installation because they don't flex. Oftentimes we don't need a really long drill bit because, again, we're just drilling through one face of the door or one side of a frame. We don't need a 4-inch long or 3-inch long drill bit. Maybe we just need a little short stubby. They're great because they don't flex. They're very, very strong. They're durable. So I'm a big fan of that type of bit. And with everything, if you work with technicians and they're always burning up drill bits, more than likely it's because, well, they may not be using a quality bit, but more than likely it's because they're using a full trigger pull on their drill. All materials have a recommended RPM, so a revolutions per minute, how fast that drill is actually spinning to cut the material. And it varies dramatically from stainless steel to aluminum. And we have aluminum storefront doors that are out there in the world that we put our hardware on, and we have stainless steel doors, anti-corrosive. And the difference, if you look at a 1/4-inch diameter drill bit, you look at aluminum, they're saying that to cut it efficiently, you really need 1900 revolutions per minute to cut that aluminum efficiently. Not that you can't cut it if you're going slower, but that's what the recommended is. If we go down to stainless steel, they're saying stainless steel with the same size drill bit is only 228 RPMs. That's really important, and a lot of technicians don't understand this, and they go through drill bits like crazy. They end up having a really difficult time cutting the harder steels. And I learned drilling safes. I used to be a safe and vault technician, and I've opened lots and lots of safes that sometimes slower is just better. In order to drill an accurate hole, though, we need to make sure that our drill bit doesn't walk, doesn't move from the place that we wanted to make that drill. We can't just put a pencil line on the door and then put the drill bit up there and then start drilling immediately. Most of the time the bit will move, and sometimes it can move by 3/16 of an inch, 1/8 of an inch easily. And now our whole install is now skewed and off just a little bit. And that can greatly affect the durability and the longevity of that particular piece of hardware. So always center punch your holes. I like to use a automatic center punch, but a manual center punch that you use with a hammer is just fine. This is an automatic center punch made in the US by Starrett. They are more expensive, but they'll last long enough that I can pass this down to my grandkids. And then you've got your manual center punches there on the left, also work fine. Transfer punches are something that I've probably been using for about 10 years, but the first few years of the locksmithing that I was doing, I didn't even know they existed. They're awesome for doing hardware installation where you need to center punch through a piece of hardware. If we look at this Norton 7500 door closer, for example, a real efficient way of installing this particular door closer is to get your first hole, your first mounting hole, which would be position A on the template. And once we get that center punch drilled, we can actually line that door closer up to that mark and then use a transfer punch which fits that hole diameter of the door closer body perfectly. So we can match this particular whatever transfer punch actually fits these mounting holes, and we can get those lined up, and it makes a perfectly centered dimple that we can then drill and get that door closer installed. very efficient. They also work great for aluminum storefront locks. Here we have the Adams Wright Steel Hawk 4300. And let's say that this particular storefront door never had the proper mounting screws. They were using just a tension wedge to keep the lock in there. But we know that this particular lock, when it's mounted with the proper screws, lasts longer, and it stays when it stays tight. So we can use a transfer punch to mark the backside of that aluminum door and then drill it out and then tap it to the 1032 screws that it comes with. Sometimes we have to drill larger holes, and it could be because it's a spindle hole that goes all the way through the door from a exit device trim. It could be a mortise lock mortise cylinder hole that goes through either one side or both sides of the door. And most people that have dealt with installation at all would recognize the little red kit there. That's a Milwaukee hole saw kit, and they're used from cutting all different types of material. They're used a lot to cut sheet metal, but they're not designed to cut sheet metal. And our doors, our hollow metal doors and our frames, well, it's made out of sheet metal. So hole saws typically cut a larger hole than you need. And when the hole is cut, it's not round. It's more of an egg-shaped hole, an oval. And the inside is razor sharp. They're just very, very sharp because they kind of scoot through the hole instead of cutting it. So I'm not a big fan of hole saws when it comes to metal. Now, if you were using a hole saw with a drill press and drilling thicker material, maybe that's fine. But for door and hardware installation, I really prefer the Annular cutters, and there on the left is just one particular brand, and they call them a Rota cut. They're also called by another brand Rota Broach, and they are designed for cutting sheet metal, and they do just an amazing job at it. So here we're going to kind of compare and contrast that. The top hole I cut with a hole saw, and the bottom I cut with one of those Annular cutters. And the problems with hole saws, one of the biggest problems is that the waste material, the plug that you would cut out of that hole, gets stuck in a hole saw. So that takes man hours. It takes time to sit there and get that plug taken out of your hole saw. And not only that, that plug that comes out is razor sharp. And if your technician's not wearing gloves, which they should be, more than likely they'll cut themselves messing with that plug. Ask me how I know. The other one, this Annular cutter, is phenomenal because that center arbor, the pointy part that's sticking out of the end, is spring-loaded. So once we finish cutting this hole, it just pops out the plug, and you can immediately go to drilling your next hole. So let's say we were putting on a Corbin Russ one, 955 exit device trim, and we have through bolts that go, 4 holes that go all the way through the door on both sides. We can just immediately go from one hole to the next because we don't have to take time to remove the plug. And by the way, that whole set, going back that whole set, that black set there, is about $60 online. So not even expensive when it comes to, I mean, this set here for the hole saws is way more than $60. I get it's larger diameter, but these things aren't even expensive. And they work phenomenally well. And you can look at the difference in the hole quality. Now this is fairly thick plate. We don't have any doors or frames that are really going to be this thick, but it's what I had, and I think it does a good job of getting the point across, is that it's just such a smoother round hole than what a hole saw can do. We need to make sure that after we drill our holes that we deburr the holes and break the corners. That's just makes for a clean install. Also, if somebody is working on the door and they're not wearing gloves, maybe we protect them from getting a cut. But there are chamfer bits, there are countersink bits, and there are these little scraping tools that do a good job of taking the corners off of material. When it comes to installing commercial hardware, especially if we're looking at Sargent commercial hardware, you know, Sargent is a premium brand. They make really quality products, but you know what? They will absolutely fall off the door like anything else if you use just regular small sheet metal screws, okay? If you're not using the screws that come with the exit device, and if you're just using some cheap self-tapping screw to put that exit device on, then they're going to fall off just like anything else would. So it's really, really important to follow the instructions and drill and tap the hole. Sargent exit devices have some holes that are 1024, as in the size is a 10, it's 24 threads per inch. Some of the holes that need to be drilled and tapped are 12 or quarter 20. And a lot of people that have experience with taps, and that's what these are taps. They put threads into metal so that you can take a machine screw and thread it into the door or the frame. And a lot of people can't stand taps. They just absolutely hate them. And I think the primary reason for that is they just were not educated to know that there are so many different types of taps out there. And unfortunately, the big box stores where you can readily find taps do not sell quality taps. And that may offend some people, but I have broken so many taps that I bought at one of those big box stores. And it was not until I started buying taps from either an industrial supply or a machinist supply that I realized that not all taps are created equal. And if we look at the three examples that I have there on my vise, starting at the right-hand side, that is a taper tap. And that taper tap is just a good all-purpose tap, but it does not really do anything with the cutting material that you're threading. So as you cut, you have to slow down, you have to back it out, you have to start again, and it takes several tries to get that thing to actually completely cut the hole. The bit in the center is a 2-flute spiral point gun tap, and these changed my life because you can use them not as your drilling bits. You still need to first drill your hole, but you can use these in a drill instead of just a tapping wrench. With some practice, you can use these to tap hundreds of holes and not break them. The tap on the left is a spiral flute tap. They are designed for milling machines, CNC milling machines, but they work phenomenally well at cutting harder materials such as, or tougher materials such as stainless. So if I'm going to be mounting exit devices on one of our stainless steel doors, I will be using a spiral flute tap like there on the left. So here is kind of a compare and contrast between the taper tap there. We're going to use that with a tap wrench. Some cutting fluid. And you get to a point where it loads and it binds and you can't go any further, and you have to back it up to break the chip off. And you could see how if you were using this type of taper tap and you had to install a continuous hinge that had 40 screws, this would take you a long time. It just cuts down on the efficiency of the installation. And yes, you could do it, but this is why a lot of technicians will substitute screws, because they don't want to tap like that. So this is, again, my 2-flute spiral point gun tap. I'm going to use it in my drill because the flute is actually hardened steel and the jaws of my drill are hardened. It typically will slip before it breaks, which is good. That's what you want. So it's bound and it slips. So you can imagine if you had 40 holes to drill and tap, using that type of tap would be a little bit quicker than the taper tap. And guess what? They're not any more expensive. And actually, in some cases, they're less expensive. And if we're doing a really tough material like stainless steel, this is a plate of 1/8 inch steel, 3/16 marine grade stainless, and that spiral flute tap just makes quick work of it. Does a good job of cleaning the chips. Chips are the little pieces of metal that are coming off of it, and it just makes for a good day. Next, I want to talk about some fluids or some things that you can put on the screws to either make them not come loose or to make sure that they will come loose when you need them to. And it depends on the type of installation. It depends on where you are in the country. But thread locking sealant, often called Loctite. Loctite is just a brand name, but thread locking sealant is very, very important and necessary for hardware when you want it to stay on the door and not vibrate loose, especially if you're dealing with aluminum storefront doors. Aluminum itself as a material is phenomenal, but it does not hold on to screws very well. It eventually gets loose on its own. You could take a screw that you put into aluminum and made sure it was really tight and just leave that piece of aluminum still and come back a year later and that screw will be loose, because the aluminum eventually gives up the tension that it was using to hold that screw in place. So aluminum storefront door locks get loose frequently just because of the property of aluminum. So if you use some Loctite, and blue is a medium strength, it's probably the one that if a technician was just going to carry one type of Loctite or thread locking sealant, they should use the blue. I prefer red, but I use just a little bit of it. Red is a little bit higher strength. You can still remove red if you use it, but it gives it a little bit more strength. I would say that if you've never used Loctite before, don't use red, use the blue. They make other colors as well, but it's definitely something that I always have in my tool bag. The second thing is dielectric grease. Dielectric grease is really great for blocking out corrosion and moisture for electronic connections. So if you have an electrified mortise lock or exit device or something electrified and you're in a very wet, corrosive environment, I definitely would use dielectric grease around the connectors, and that would just prevent that moisture and the salt, air, or whatever from getting to that connector. Anti-seize lubricant is great, again, in those really, really moisture-heavy environments, and you have maybe a part of a piece of hardware that you take on and off frequently. The anti-seize lubricant will prevent something from rusting tight. So if you have something that's not stainless, that's just a regular steel part, you can use anti-seize lubricant and it'll just make it last longer. When we're on the job site, work holding is really important for efficient installs, also for safety factors in general. Vices are important to have. If you have a place to mount a vise, then that works really well. But what I've found is on job sites, these jaw horses work really, really well. They clamp very, very tight. They can hold really small materials, even like the rod from an exit device. Let's say you have a surface vertical rod exit device and you're installing it on a 6/8 door, and it can be installed on a 6/8 as long as that rod is cut down. These jaw horses have enough strength, they can actually clamp on that and hold it tight so you can cut it down. Work really well. Door dollies, jaw stands for holding doors while we're prepping installs also work really well. So I want to talk just a little bit about the beveled edges of commercial doors. In the residential world, we don't see very many doors that are beveled, but in the commercial world we do, and that means that you have a high side and a low side on the door. If the installer is measuring for the hardware installation and they're putting the vertical center line, which we're calling the backset, if they're measuring for the backset and they're measuring off of the low side or they're measuring off of the high side for that backset, well, they're going to be off a little bit. And to show that, here I'm measuring off of the high side of this door block. The door block is beveled, and I'm measuring to 2 3/4 inches, which is a very standard backset for hardware. And then what I did is I measured off of the middle of the door up to the top, and I transferred that line down. What I did next is I drilled the hole on the high side measurement. So I measured on the high side, my backset 2 3/4. I went ahead and drilled that hole, and you can see that I'm actually off a little bit from the proper backset. So if you see a commercial door and you see the latch bolt is actually sticking out of the edge of the door a little bit, it's not flush. More than likely when they were doing the backset, let's say that if the technician installed that hole in the field, they missed the backset by a little bit, and now that latch bolt is sticking out a little bit. So what people will do oftentimes is they'll try to screw that latch bolt tighter into the side of the door, and that puts the whole block set into a bind and either makes it to where it doesn't function at all or it doesn't last as long as it could otherwise. A lot of our hardware comes with paper templates, and I love paper templates because I can take scissors to them and cut them up into a template that's useful. What I'll do is if I have several different holes that I have to drill through the door, I will cut a little diamond shape into every one of those little mounting spots so that I can look through those holes and use that template on both sides of the door. So first I will sit there and measure my horizontal and my vertical center lines on both sides of the door. You know, I'm a big fan of painter's tape, so I'll do that on both sides of the door. And then I can line that template up perfectly with those lines. And then I can mark all of my installation holes, all my through bolt holes, take that template off, put it on the back side of the door, and do the same thing. Adams Wright is really good at supplying us these clear stickers, these sticky templates that go over for aluminum storefront doors. And you still need to measure and mark your vertical and horizontal center lines, and then your sticky template is referenced off of those marks. So if we don't make those marks first, then our template is not that useful because we can get it skewed, we can get it tilted, and then our installation will be off. So we've already talked about a lot of the things that you would do to kind of get ready for an exit device install, but a thing that you need to pay attention to is the door prepped or not for the exit device? Let's say we're installing a rim exit device and there are no holes in the door at all. Well, if there are no holes in the door, then we go off of the installation instructions that tell us we're 37 5/8 off of the finished floor, or we're 41 inches from the center height of the push rail to the finished floor. We go off of those measurements unless the owner has something specific. They have a standard that we would use in the other case. But if it's prepped, if there are already holes in the door, then our templates that we use to put the rest of our holes, because the door never comes completely prepped. There are always going to be some installation holes that you have to make into the door. So again, I'm going to put painter's tape on the door. I'm going to either reference off of the existing prepped hole to find my vertical and horizontal center line, or I'm going to create that on the door. based off of that height off of the finished floor and the back set. So if we look here, again, 2 3/4 is a very common back set. We have here that this exit device, the vertical center line is that 2 3/4. Again, I'm going to measure that from the center of the bevel, and then I'm going to come up that 37 5/8 for that other center line. So it's important to take the time, and sometimes it takes way more time to measure and get everything put on the door than it actually does for the install itself. But what that ensures to us is that we only have to install it one time. We don't have to waller out or enlarge any of our installation holes because we missed the measurement the first time, which will cut down on installation time. It'll also cut down on recall trips or second trips out to work on something. Once you get your chassis head installed, which is this part here, with Sargent, the rail actually slides on next, and we have 2 screws that go through that secure the push rail. A level is really important to make sure that we get this end bracket on the door in the right spot. If the door is ferrous, you can use a magnet and actually put that magnet there underneath the rail and hold it to that level. It kind of gives you a third hand so that you can install the end bracket. You can also use some tape and hook that tape to the door closer and hold it up as well if you need a third hand. All of those installation instructions and templates are found online. So if you ever get a piece of hardware where somebody has gone through the box and they have lost the installation instructions and the templates, we publish all of that online that anybody can access. We'll talk a little bit about that here in a second. Continuous hinge install can be really tricky if it's a full mortise hinge, and it really has to be done in 2 parts, where we have the door on sawhorses, or we have the door laying down. And what we would do is from the top edge of the door, we would line that hinge up against the top edge of the door. We would reference all of our mounting holes from that point. Then I go ahead and clamp that continuous hinge to the door and go ahead and center punch and drill and tap all of those holes and mount that hinge to the door. Once I've done that and make sure that everything is straight, I deinstall that hinge from the door, take that hinge off of the door, move it to the frame, drop the hinge by 1/8 of an inch from the top of the frame, and then do the exact same thing. Then we can drill and mark everything on the frame. We can install that hinge on the frame. Then we can move the door to the leaf and then get everything secured. So we're doing this in multiple parts, but this ensures that the hinge is straight on both the frame and the door before we actually put any weight on it. It's very, very difficult if we put the hinge on the door and it's nice and straight on the door, then we try to move the door and the hinge to the frame and hold it still and get it blocked and get it shemmed and everything we need to do, and then install and mount the hinge on the frame. It's much easier to deal with the hinge as itself before we mount it to anything. So I mark and measure the door or the frame. Either one could be done first, but I do both. And then once all the holes are drilled and tapped and perfectly straight, then they kind of come together. Now this brings me to some other digital tools that ASSA ABLOY has that can help you out. And one of those is the ASSA ABLOY DSS resource library. So if you're on a PC and you're on a computer and you're looking for either catalog pages, you're looking for installation instructions, templates, all of these things can be found at the ASSA ABLOY DSS Resource Center. And that's for all of our door security solutions brands. So everything that we sell in North America, that are a part of DSS can be found at that one location. If you're working on a tablet, say you're in the field, you're a project manager, or maybe you're an installer and you're in the field, then you definitely need to download a couple of apps. The first one is the ABLOY customer support app, and I'm actually going to show you how that works using my iPad, so give me just a second here. So what you're looking at here is my iPad. This is the ABLOY customer support app. We have 3 buttons. The first one is technical support. If I click on that one, it's broken up by brand. Let's click on Sergeant. If we click on Sergeant, you have the option of calling to talk to a tech rep. Once you're talking to that tech rep, you can actually stream video directly with them. So if I'm working on something, I'm not quite sure how it comes apart, or maybe I think that it was installed wrong, or I need to adjust it, whatever. Streaming video is very efficient because they can see exactly what you're looking at. Communication works quicker. You can also send a tech rep an email. That's probably the slowest response that you're going to get. You could get a response in minutes or days, depending on if it's Friday at 5 o'clock on the weekend. But definitely voice call is, I think, the best way. I like talking to people in person anyway. Streaming that video is a very useful tool. You can also chat with the tech reps if it's a simple question that you've got. And you can also get to the resource center there by clicking that tab as well. So I'm going to go backwards now, and we've got our 3 main buttons again. The customer service tab are again for those order status questions, those pricing questions, things like that. You're not going to have the streaming video functionality as you would when you're talking to a tech rep, but all of the other things, it shows you what time Sergeant opens in your time zone. I'm in Central Time Zone, so it says that they open at 7 a.m. and they close at 6:30 p.m. Your app is going to know what time zone you're in, and it will change those times accordingly. If we click on Resource Center, this takes you to the ABLOY DSS Resource Center that I was just talking about that you would normally use on your PC. Click on Sergeant, you can see all of the things that we could click on: catalogs, installation instructions, templates, training. All of those things are basically at your fingertips. Installation instructions, again, it's going to take me to, what do I need? Board lock, 11 line installation instructions, all functions except hotel, and there we have our actual PDF that would be in the box for your install is right there now on your mobile device. In addition to that, some of our installation instructions have these QR codes, and these QR codes take you directly to YouTube videos that show you that particular part of the install. The next app, briefly before we call it a day, is going to be the Built app. That's Built Intelligent Instructions. And this is an app that we use, we don't own. But if you go ahead and search for, let's say, Norton, for instance, you'll see that Norton has 2 different low energy operators built onto this. If we click on it, it'll tell us it's a 1-person install. It takes about an hour. It has a specified number of steps. You can see that I went through this previously and I was on step 34. So it has a memory. It knows where I was the last time. We can go through and hit start.
This is the Adiz poolside.
Every single image you can rotate, and this is me. I'm doing this with my finger. If we want to look at something specific, We can pan, tilt, zoom. Once we get to a specific installation point and we need some better clarification, we can move everything around. Some things are clickable. It tells you exactly what that device is. So it's a very useful tool. We don't have all of our installations on this app, but the ones that are here, it's very useful, especially a lot of our integrated solutions are here as well. So with that, we're going to conclude this session. I really appreciate everybody's time. I hope that you learned something. Again, I am not somebody who knows everything, but definitely like to share what I do know. If you've got any questions, now is a good time to ask. Otherwise, please join us for additional trainings. And I'll stick around for just a little bit to answer any questions that you have. So one of the questions is thoughts on DeWalt impact driver tips. So I have used probably just about every brand of impact driver tips out there. And unless DeWalt changed their design, which they may have, they do that a lot. I don't particularly like them. They don't hold into screws very well. There are some that are better that I've found. If you had to use it, you know, it's better than nothing, I guess. One question is, where do you measure the back set on the door? From the high side, middle, or the low side? You always measure from the middle of the door, middle edge of the door. If you measure your back set from that side, and then you transfer that mark to the top of the door, and then transfer those lines to either face, they'll technically be different measurements from their respective side, but they will be going right through the middle of the door. Oh, I got it. Question was about DeWalt impact driver taps, threaded taps. So in my experience, the impact taps, there's Greenlee makes them, DeWalt makes them, there's a few other companies that make them, and what they are is they're a tap that you could use with an impact driver. The ones that I've measured have been a little, they have been a little oversized, which means that your screw doesn't hold quite as tight as it would if you were using a regular tap. Now, that's just my experience with a couple of brands that I've seen. So I would measure it and make sure that they're giving you accurate threads. The other thing is I've seen some that have a drill bit and tap combo. Some of those are good. Some of those, again, are a little oversized. The drill bit is oversized, making the tapping a little bit easier. And that just makes the hardware not hold to the door quite as well. So check, again, measure that, make sure it's a proper size. Also, if you have somebody who is kind of like a gorilla with tools and everything is a full trigger pull and they just push really hard on the doors, then the drill tip combos don't work well. They tend to break off. So you have to be kind of delicate with them. But those are my 2 cents. Again, reach out to us if you need anything. If you need some custom training, our office is available to design custom training for customers. Just reach out to us and we'll see what we can do for you. But really appreciate everybody's time. Have an awesome rest of your day and be safe.